Good morning from the Florence Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. This is a small gathering of us here today, March 15th, to put our Sunday service into virtual format so we can stay connected, if only for a few minutes. As we do at our fellowship, we start every service with singing Spirit of Life. It's number 123 in our hymnal, so those who are here today, let's sing Spirit of Life a cappella. Are we ready?
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Thank you, everybody. So there are a few announcements I'd like to give for you at this point. And all of these announcements and the websites and the emails and all of that we will provide also in this video as well as in written format when the e-blast comes out. So I've just been informed that the cook-free lunch on Tuesday has been changed, shall we say. The United Methodist Church is donating money to both Subways, so anybody who's needing a meal on Tuesday or Thursdays coming up, they are welcome to go to Subway and get a free sandwich. So thank you to the United Methodist Church for that.
The code word is free lunch.
And the code word is free lunch. The spring equinox celebration on March 21st at St. Andrews will be held outside in the fresh air, walking the labyrinth, and that is on the 21st at 11. Join Rosemary Alden and others and celebrate this glorious time of the year in the great outdoors. The Spiritual Journey Circle on March 21st, unfortunately, is also canceled. And Dr. Ruth is always available if you need to reach out. She's at pastor.foof@gmail.com. Sunday service, next Sunday service, March 22nd, unfortunately is canceled as well. But we hope to get Dr. Ruth to tape record her message like we're doing today, and we will have that available as well. We hope to have our doors open again on March 29th when Reverend Stephen Landale returns, comes to us from Eugene. We're looking forward to that. Dean Schrock plans to continue his Wednesday class unless he contacts you directly. And I think the FOG group, if I understand, is continuing to do their hikes and outdoor adventures on Tuesdays. Deb Jordan has everybody's contact information if that should change. And finally, if you attend the sacred dance class that Denise Weatherwax-Ebner hosts, she will be here unless she notifies you in advance. Or you can call her at 999-7537. So, welcome, 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 welcome. I'm going to provide with you a brief welcoming. This is by Amanda Schuber, and it's titled, "We Are Glad You Are Here." If this is your first time listening to a YouTube, or your 101st time, we are glad you are here. If you carry the weight of a weary world on your shoulders, or you entered our virtual home with a song in your heart and a skip in your step, we are glad you are here. If you are the loudest voice in your community, or the subtle hand behind the scenes, we are glad you are here. If you have failed once, or 1,000 times, we are glad you are here. This FOOF community is what it is because of your presence, whether in person today or virtual. So welcome into this space of love, support, justice, compassion, fellowship, and worship. We are glad you are here. Today, together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser than when we woke up this morning. My name is Sally Wantz, and on behalf of our members and extraordinary friends, I welcome you here today. As Karen makes her way up to the front, let us move into worship, willing to be authentic with those around you, honest within ourselves. That's what Karen's going to say in just a moment. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Karen do that.
You can see how much rehearsal time we've actually had. Good morning. Today's chalice lighting is titled A Communion of Heart and Soul by Bruce Southworth. For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurturance and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul. And that's really nice. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Everyone here, everyone at home. In our community, we make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person in this community has value. Each person's experience matters. We share our sorrows with one another today, knowing that sorrow comes into each person's life, and together we offer comfort. We also share our joys with one another, knowing too that joy comes into all our lives, and together we offer comfort. I'm sorry, let me try that again. We also share our joys with one another, knowing too that joy comes into all our lives, knowing that together our voices can rise in a chorus of celebration. We make space each week for joys and concerns, knowing the life and experience of every person matters, and together our ripples in the water send energy outward and inward as needed. For those here today, if you wish to come forward, please drop a shell in the water and briefly share what is in your heart or on your mind. If you want us to share your joy or concern next week, send us an email and we'll read it out loud on your behalf. Send it to florence.unitarian@gmail.com. And so now, if there are any here assembled that would like to share a joy or concern.
My joy is that Jim and I just got back from a 3-week trip into South America, and we were on a cruise ship for 2 weeks. And we came back with nobody on our cruise ship ever having gotten sick. We did not get quarantined, we have not been condemned, and we are here and happy, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time. My heart does go out to every other living soul who is quarantined at this point in time, whether on a cruise ship or in any other form of travel. That must be a horrible, horrible experience. So our hearts are with you. Thank you.
My concern is for anyone out there that is in fear, that is frightened of life right now. My joy is that I truly know that we all have the ability to heal from the inside out, to call on whatever form of universal love that we believe in, to heal ourselves and those around us without even touching them.
I know that with all that's going on, it's creating havoc. But I also know that this is a time to be centered and to spend time with loved ones and to get to know and appreciate those surroundings that you have, that you love. Jennifer and I have 3 cats, and we know when things get a little bit weird and hinky, we can look at those 3 cats and just giggle till our heart's content and have a wonderful afternoon, evening, whatever the case may be. Those cats bring such joy to us. They don't know the difference, so we don't know the difference either. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I ask Sally to drop a final shell for all those unspoken joys and concerns that rest deep within us. Blessed be.
Good morning. Our reading today is number 602, If There Is to Be Peace. Since none of you have virtual books in front of you, I will read the whole thing. If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. That's from Lao Tzu.
It is my great pleasure this morning to introduce my husband, who is going to give the talk today, Jim McDiarmid. Dr. Jim McDiarmid. Dr. Jim McDiarmid got his doctoral degree, a long time ago, in the Central Valley of California. He was the psychologist on staff for a residency program in Merced, California, where he taught young doctors in their second year to learn counseling skills and nicer ways to approach people, like when you have bad news and that good kind of stuff. Jim went on in his career to be a professor at the University of California, Merced, where he taught for 10 years before we retired to Florence 3.5 years ago. So with that little bit of bio, it is my great pleasure to introduce Jim.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and thank you for being my chart flipper for this morning.
The other job this morning.
So I know Reverend Ruth has been going through the various UU principles, and so we're kind of skipping to the very end. Principle 7 is the one I'm going to talk about today on climate justice. Now the principle here is that all of us, all life is connected together, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. And the fact that UU's principles are such that we want a sustainable world that is compassionate and just at the same time, especially thinking of our neighbors who may not have as many resources and need maybe a little bit of extra help. So I'm going to talk about the hardest part here. We're going to go back to high school biology and show again how everything is interconnected and how this is related to things like climate change, global warming. So we have two processes here. These are done by plants, photosynthesis, and this is done by animals. And as you can see, they're opposite chemical processes. So the sun comes down, provides energy. Carbon dioxide is already in the air, and plants are able to make leaves and wood and so forth out of that. An animal will come along and eat the plant, and then another animal will eat that animal, and it finally goes up to the top of the food chain, and that last animal will eventually die and return its carbon to be recycled again. So it makes this, and early people would either eat the vegetables or they'd eat animals for their subsistence. And in respiration, they would break down sugars, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, as long as we're breathing in oxygen to give us energy, to movement, for our neurons, for everything. And then we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. So you can see they're the opposite. And that went on for hundreds of thousands of years, that interconnection between plants and animals. And the amount of carbon dioxide in the air was the same, because there was no reason to increase or decrease, although there were fluctuations. Both the Russians and the Americans have dug down several kilometers into the Antarctic to get core samples, and they are able to find out that yes, there were fluctuations in carbon dioxide, fluctuations in the temperature, but they pretty well stayed the same within a certain range. That really changed with the start of the Industrial Revolution, because then we started using steam, and we needed either coal, oil, or gas in order to cause these machines to move, which is really what we wanted, to move machines. And then we came up with something more efficient, the internal combustion engine, which we still have today in most cars, for example. So again, it's basically the same as respiration, except of course, in burning, it's much more intense. So we get energy and carbon dioxide by burning these fossil fuels. And that adds more carbon dioxide to the environment that the planet is just not able to cope with, and I'll tell you why. Again, going back to high school biology, our atmosphere, which is a very thin layer right around the crust of the Earth, mainly made up of mostly nitrogen. Oxygen is very important for us as animals. And then these greenhouse gases that you've heard about over and over and over on TV and read about them. And if you look at just the 1% of greenhouse gases, you could break them down into these three, plus this one I'll talk about. Now, these three occur naturally. Animals breathe out carbon dioxide. If you burn anything, carbon dioxide is going to be released. If a volcano erupts, it's going to give out methane, nitrous oxide. So these occur naturally, and they always have been in balance. But now, again, because we're burning fossil fuels, we're having an increase, especially of carbon dioxide. As you can see, this is the largest polluter. Now, this one is actually a happy story, even though it's only a small percentage. You remember back a few years ago, you heard on the news about the CFCs, which came from like deodorant sprays or hair sprays, or they were also in refrigerators. And they were burning holes in both of our polars because of the burning through the ozone layer. And this is actually a success story. So countries got together and signed the Montreal Accord, which countries agreed not to use CFCs, and that those two holes that were in the Arctic and the Antarctic are now healing themselves. So this is a good example of what we can do if we decide to get together as nations and help each other preserve our planet. Now, just to go a little bit further about what happens when the sunlight comes in, this is schematic because obviously our Earth it doesn't have this big of an atmosphere, but I just wanted to show what happens when the sunlight comes in. About half of that is absorbed, but mostly by the Earth or the sea. And if it hits it, about half of it bounces up here and hits up against the atmosphere. About 10% is lost into space, but the rest of it stays in the atmosphere. So all the time we're adding more and more carbon dioxide and these other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and therefore it just warms up more and more and more. Now, to drive this point home, let's look at a few other planets in our solar system. Mars is the closest to the sun, and yet it's cold. It's cold because it doesn't have an atmosphere. So the sunlight comes in and bounces right back off into space. On the other hand, you remember the rings of Saturn, big planet, not second to Jupiter. But it has an extremely thick atmosphere. So any sunlight that comes in, even though it's much less because it's so much further away, it stays in. And so this planet is way too hot for ever colonizing it. So what we've done, as I mentioned, from those ice cores, we know the temperature, we know where, when, say, volcanoes erupted, we can look back on those because they've drilled down several kilometers into the Antarctic to get these ice cores. And these, if I continued this, you'd see a little squiggly line. These carbon dioxide amounts have changed over the years, but it wasn't until, again, the Industrial Revolution that the amount of carbon dioxide started increasing, again, from burning coal, oil, or gas. All three of them will break down the carbon and hydrogen bonds between them to provide energy, and that's what we've been doing more and more and more. As you can see, they're increasing. And that, by no coincidence, is the same if you started about the same time with temperature, measuring temperature. And we actually have temperature measurements going back to whaling ships, and Russians and Norwegians and Americans. Now we have satellites, so it's much more accurate. But the temperature has been going up. In fact, a lot of the researchers call this a hockey stick. So if you look at the previous one, it kind of looks a little bit like a hockey stick as it starts to gradually increase, and then it shoots up to an exponential curve. And that's what's happening with global temperature. And we know, I put this in Fahrenheit because that's what we're used to, but we really are not going to be able to go above 2 degrees, and that's kind of where we're headed. At one time we thought that we were going to reach 2 degrees in 2050, but the rate we're going right now, we're going to reach that 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2030, because we've been accelerating more than we had originally projected. So I like this quote by Governor Inslee, who, if you remember from the presidential debates, that was the one thing he was really pushing, and Washington can be a model for other states, and some of the measures and laws they've passed in order to arrest greenhouse gases and therefore the global warming. And I remember when Al Gore came out with his Inconvenient Truth, and I'd listened to that, and I said, oh yeah, that's something we have to do something about. But it's only more recently that I really kind of agree with the scientists. There's a real urgency to this, and we really have to do something about this if we want to preserve the planet for future generations. So I just want to give you one example of the consequences of global warming, and that is because we have so many more people. People have been building houses in places right near the forest, so wildfires probably would have increased anyway. But because of global warming, the number of acres that have burned have gone up really dramatically. Again, we get that hockey stick curve as this increases dramatically. So just to summarize, what are some of the consequences of this global warming? Not only increasing wildfires, but increasing the length of the fire season, having more droughts, more insect outbreaks. So that means more ticks, more mosquitoes, carrying diseases, as well as bacteria that are increasing and therefore more vulnerable to carrying diseases. Lower snowpack. In 2015, California virtually had no snowpack. That was the year that where Karen and I lived in the Central Valley. There was only 5 inches of rain for the entire year, and the agriculture in California really depends on the snowpack. So when they don't have that, the farmers really suffer, because that whole Central Valley is irrigated by basically the runoff that go into the canals, and then 1/3 of all the food consumed in the United States is produced in California. So if we don't have snowpack, then the whole country will suffer. Increasing storm intensity, so we have more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes like Katrina all the way through Sandy, more recently Harvey and Dora, things like that. And plus, because of the sunlight being absorbed by the oceans, we're increasing the sea level. So it's gone up 8 inches since 1890. So that's 130 years. But it really has been increasing dramatically in what the last 17 years. So it's going up, or 27 years, it's actually going up again at that exponential rate. Some other things that are happening in the Arctic is being warmed 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900. And that's even greater than toward the equator. So the warming that's increasing at the Arctic and the Antarctic is greater than the rest of the planet. Arctic ice has decreased 40%. Now you've probably seen pictures on TV of ships going through the Arctic, whereas before they were stopped. And then we've always wanted a passage, a Northwest Passage. A lot of those early explorers, if you remember, were trying to find a Northwest Passage. Well, now we do have a Northwest Passage, but it's really not a good thing. And then the big places where the most ice is in the Antarctic and Greenland. And we lose about, I translated this, I found statistics that was a little, you could make more sense out of it. So many billion number of tons, I don't know really what that means. But if you can imagine a cube of ice, 4 miles by 4 miles by 4 miles, that's how much ice melts every year in both the Antarctic and Greenland. So glaciers are retreating. One of the things that one of the interpreters on the trip we were taking when we were in Chile was saying that they are melting their glaciers in Chile for mining, because that's part of their industry in Chile. And the mining industry consumes twice as much water as the rest of industry and people and all the rest. And so they're basically melting their glaciers to keep their mining industry going. Oceans are absorbing 90% of this excess heat, so that warming up bleaches the coral reefs like the Great Barrier Reef off of Australia. Oceans absorb about 25% of the carbon dioxide, and so carbon dioxide mixes with the water to give you carbonic acid, which is a weak organic acid. So it's not like hydrochloric acid or anything like that, but it does lower the pH just enough to interfere with the shellfish's ability to turn calcium and the carbonate into calcium carbonate, which is what they need for their shells. So mussels, shrimps, lobsters, all what they're doing is migrating further north in order to find colder climates. And right here, even in Oregon, occasionally you hear on TV about the Dungeness crabs not being able to be harvested for lengths of time because of the toxic algae that's being released. And again, that's related to global warming. And the last one I'll just talk about is Lyme disease, which was first discovered in Lyme, Connecticut, and it's caused by a very small little tick, they call it deer tick. And that used to be confined to kind of New York and then up into the Northeast, and now that's going all the way down to the Carolinas, and it's moving all the way across into the Midwest, again, because it's warming more and more. So what can we do about this? It sounds like it's all doom and gloom, but I'll have to say one thing that's really positive, and that is in 2019 was the first year there were more investments in renewable energy than in fossil fuels. So there are some bright spots, but clearly we're going to have to decrease our use of fossil fuels and rely a lot more on renewable energy. And these, of course, can be very profitable if we could kind of move people into those. And the other thing is when we think about what changes that we could make individually and as a larger society at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and then at the international. At the international is really where we'll get more bang for our bucks. But unfortunately, with this trend toward populism and American first and all that, that really is counterproductive. We're really, you know, just like we did with CFCs, if we want to really make a difference for our planet, we're going to have to get all the nations together in order to pass policies and agreements. Like we have made some efforts toward that, but you know, pulling us out of the Paris Accord was not probably a good idea for that. Now, personally, we have to make our own choices about what we're willing to do as far as things like recycle and you know, maybe buying a electric car and so forth. But I don't want us to start thinking in terms of, oh, trying to shame people or make them feel guilty, because already when you think about it, if we're Americans, we're already using a lot more and emitting a lot more greenhouse gases than other countries other than China. China's ahead of us. For example, Karen and I flew down to Buenos Aires and back. We used more, we emitted more carbon dioxide just on that trip that somebody from Mali would be responsible for emitting in 10 years. So you know, we all make our choices. And the last thing I want to say is just coming back to what we originally talked about at the beginning, and that is using these principles that, you know, we're all interconnected, plants and animals. You've heard this over and over, and you've seen the results of global warming on TV. It's very dramatic there with the Australian bushfires and so forth. And you know, we've had people coming up from paradise because they were burned out to food. So it's very real when you know that affects you, and it's going to affect us, and it's going to affect our children and our grandchildren more and more unless we decide as individuals and as groups to do something about this. Okay, any questions or comments?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment that Lyme disease has actually made it to the West Coast.
Oh, it has?
Yes,
Oh,
it's something I studied when I was doing the Appalachian Trail a couple of years ago. The snakes and bears didn't scare me, but Lyme disease did.
Wow.
And it's so Northern California
Yes.
up through the Pacific coast. It's a real
Yeah,
real
absolutely.
thing. So even here.
Yeah.
No, that's not good news.
As citizens, what can we do as far as trying to get our political people to get back engaged
Well,
with the world to do something?
Yeah, I think, Don, we have to not only elect people who are on board with doing something about climate change, but we also have to hold them accountable. We got to write letters, we got to make phone calls, because, you know, like most politicians, they make promises, but once they get into office, they'll sometimes, something like climate change kind of drops down on the priority list. We just have to hold them accountable. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm also reminded that the Unitarian Universalist Association has a very robust website, and I know that they cover these things like climate change. They have a newsletter they put out about all the important things that Unitarian Universalists believe in strongly. They don't take a political stand, but they do take a stand on nature and the 7 principles that we adhere to and that we believe in. So if you are listening right now and you're interested to know more about this, certainly I know you can reach out to Jim. Just send us an email at, what's our Email address florence.unitarian@gmail.com. Let us know what questions you have. We'll be glad to relay them to Jim and get them back published, okay? So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So this would be the time in our service where we would pass around our offertory basket. So in lieu of that, we do have a virtual offertory, and that is on our website, which is, what is our website again? It is florenceuuf.com, www.florenceuuf.com. There is a button down there that says donate, and you can donate either through your PayPal account or donate or contribute through your credit card. I did that recently to test the system, and it works really nice. You'll get an email back that will tell you exactly what you've just donated, and to make sure that we continue that process of honoring our commitment to this particular fellowship, especially when we can't be together. So to make a donation or your pledge payment of support, you can also mail it to our P.O. Box 2502 in Florence 97439. So that's our sort of our, in a nutshell, about the offertory. I also ask that you remember our folks at Florence Food Share. We try to collect money. We don't try, we do. We collect money for Florence Food Share. It's a little difficult to do in these couple of weeks, but if you'd like to stop by Food Share, I'm certain they would welcome anything you want to clean out of your pantry and bring to them. Cash is always welcome as well. So, having said all that, before our service draws to an end with the extinguishing of our chalice, and as Jay, who is our videographer, makes his way to the front, I want to thank everybody who's here today. We've got Don and Catherine, Karen, Jim, Darlene, myself, and Jay. So we're going to extinguish our chalice today before we sing our peace song. This is by Becky Laurent, and it goes like this. As flame is to spirit, so spirit is to breath, and breath to song. Though we extinguish the flame in this sanctuary, may we tend it in our hearts until we meet again. Blessed be. Thank you, Jay. So, I have been asked by my fellow foofers here that we continue and conclude with the singing of the peace song. So we're going to stand up here in front of you and be brave enough to sing our peace song a cappella one more time. And then we're going to bid you adieu and wish you well this wonderful Sunday, or whenever it is you're watching this particular service. And yeah, Jay's going to come on up here. He's got the words on the back. Catherine, you have a better voice than I. You can sing into the microphone. Shall we start? The peace song. We have to begin it though. We are brave still.
There be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, a peace that was meant to be, with love as our center, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
All the best to all of you. We did our best to be with you this morning, and all the best. Godspeed.
Yes.